Just moments ago, President Trump posted on Truth Social that he spoke to his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, on the phone for more than an hour about his country's more than 3-year-long war with Ukraine. And Trump noted, quote, "It was a good conversation, but not a conversation that will lead to immediate peace." I want to bring in New York Times chief White House correspondent Peter Baker, who spent 4 years in Russia as the Washington Post Moscow's co-bureau chief. Always good to have you at times like these, Peter. I don't have to tell you that on the campaign trail, President Trump promised to end Russia's war with Ukraine as soon as he took office. Now he seems to be acknowledging it's not quite so easy. But I wonder what you read into both the length and what we know of the content of this phone call.
Yeah, not even as soon as he took office. He said he would do it before he took office. He said it was so easy he would get it done in 24 hours once he was elected. Of course, that didn't happen. And it has been a lot more difficult than he anticipated. And that's because it seems like Vladimir Putin doesn't want peace. If you have an aggressor, an invader, a country that sent its forces into the other country in order to conquer territory, and that aggressor is not ready for peace, it's awfully hard to negotiate a deal. And Vladimir Putin has given up no concessions that we can see, at least publicly, in these discussions. And it looks like Trump isn't really pushing at this point. What he said in that statement today was they spoke for more than an hour and 15 minutes, something like that. He says that it was a good conversation, as you showed in that clip, but not one that will lead to immediate peace. He said something very interesting in that he said that Putin described or discussed the Ukrainian attack on their strategic bombers that was carried out the last few days with drones, an extraordinary attack inside Russian territory, and that Putin said that they would have to respond to that. And it's very odd to see a president of the United States repeating a Russian threat against Ukraine, an American ally, without in any way addressing it one way or the other. He didn't say that they should. He didn't say they shouldn't. He simply said that that was a fact of life in effect, and he didn't warn them against it. He didn't actually, in the statement anyway, say anything about how Putin needs to de-escalate this conflict. Instead, he moved very quickly away from the Ukraine issue to Iran, where he says he thinks he can work with Vladimir Putin in order to create some sort of a nuclear deal. It seems almost as if he's washing his hands of Ukraine in order to buy some support for this other deal he wants to reach.
So there's also a very interesting statement about another phone call. The TASS news agency, which you know well, is reporting on a phone call between Vladimir Putin and the new Pope Leo. And a couple of interesting things. One is that, according to this readout, Putin drew his attention, meaning the Pope's attention, to the escalation of the conflict by the Kyiv regime, obviously referencing some of those surprise moves that have happened from the Ukrainians. But also, it says Putin expressed gratitude to Pope Leo for his willingness to assist in resolving the conflict. And the Russian leader confirmed his interest in achieving peace through political and diplomatic means. Is there, do you think, some kind of opening that could be provided by the Vatican as a site, by Pope Leo himself? Is there a level of respect from both of these men for the new Pope that might be able to move the ball forward?
Well, it's conceivable. We don't know much because we don't have a history with this Pope. He's new to the position, obviously. We haven't seen his willingness to play that kind of a role in an international situation. You did hear recently the Trump administration talk about maybe turning it over to the Pope, in effect, sending the responsibility for negotiating some sort of a peace to the Vatican and basically stepping back from that. I'm not sure where that came from, but it does suggest perhaps there has been some conversation about this, and maybe that's why the President Putin and the Pope spoke today, because there's been some discussion. It's something to watch, obviously. This is a Pope who's brand new to the job. We don't know what kind of role, what kind of a skill set he would bring to this particular negotiation if he were to try to involve himself. Traditionally, popes have encouraged peace, but haven't actually been the brokers of specific deals. And Vladimir Putin's made very clear he wants, before any fighting stops, to have very specific concessions from the Ukrainians and from the West. And I'm not sure whether the Pope would be in the position to deliver those or not.
Yeah, or whether you just bring some people together in a room. We don't know what exactly that means. Let me ask you finally about, because you touched on Iran, and that was the other thing that was discussed in this phone call between the two presidents. I mean, wasn't it just a couple of weeks ago there was some suggestion that they were close to making a deal? Are those talks falling apart? What do we know about where talks about Iran and the nuclear deal stand?
Well, they're hung up on a lot of the same things that were difficult in the last round during the Obama administration when they were trying to negotiate the deal that they eventually did sign and that Trump then threw out, what they call the JCPOA, which is the question of whether Iran gets to have any enrichment of uranium at all. You can enrich uranium for civilian purposes, and then you highly enrich it to make it possible for weapons grade uranium. And the question is whether or not Iran should have any at all. The president has said no, they shouldn't have any at all. But some of the discussion in these talks includes some sort of a temporary stage in which they would be able to allow to keep some level of enrichment. These are hard issues to negotiate. Iran is not willing to give up everything. Trump is demanding that they do give up everything. And so we'll see that the tone of today's message, today's social media post suggests a degree of skepticism that they're getting there. But on the other hand, it does seem to be his sort of number one overseas diplomatic priority at the moment.